You're listening to The Rich Life Revolution with me, Michelle Cooper. My mission is to empower you to step into your next level of wealthy. You'll hear all the deets, a little bit of inspiration, and real life takeaways so that you can create your own rich life revolution. Let's dig in. Hey girl, hey, welcome to the Rich Life Revolution. I'm your host, Michelle, and today we're going to be talking about moving from a stressed survival state around money to embodying your financial empowerment and the power of preparedness. My guest today is Tanya Taylor, who is a CPA. She also has an MBA. This is one educated gal, and she is simply remarkable. She is a powerhouse who transformed her life from poverty to prosperity and is now on a mission to empower others, especially women, to take control of their financial futures. We're going to dive into Tanya's incredible journey from immigrating to the United States from Jamaica at just 16 years old with only $100 in her pocket to becoming a successful CPA with a thriving financial education business. Tanya also shares some candid insights into her personal finance philosophies and the importance of financial preparedness. She specifically stands for and will tell us why insurance and open conversations about money are essential for financial peace of mind. Let's dive in. Welcome, Tanya. It's so good to have you on the Rich Life Revolution podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, your career is impressive, my friend. I was blown away by your story and everything that you've done in the world. I absolutely love some of the aspects, like founding a children's financial education club. I think is awesome. You know, volunteering to teach personal finance and wealth building, I think is amazing. And of course, your story, which I'm hoping, I know you will kind of share with the listeners today. So thank you for showing up and thank you for the impact that you're creating in the world.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And so are you. So thank you for that too.
Awesome. Awesome. So, tell us a little bit of your story, right? I know you have quite a dramatic story, I think. And, you came to the United States from Jamaica, and tell us what that was like and what was your journey like?
Yeah. So I was 16. I had just graduated high school, which is not unusual in Jamaica to graduate at 16. But we were extremely poor, and my parents had six of us. And what am I going to do after high school? I went to a really great high school, but my parents just couldn't afford to send me on to higher education. And then I had the opportunity to come to America, which was a story in itself. But anyway, just we had no family here, so they were trying to get someone for me to stay with so I could come and change my life. I had a visa, so I came on a visa, but I came undocumented. I had no family, so I literally was like, my parents asked someone, can she stay? And they said yes, but they weren't sure. Eventually, they allowed me to stay. And then once I realized I had the opportunity to stay, it was like, and I had like $100. So for me, it was okay, here I am that one person in the family that had this opportunity. How do I take advantage of this to not just get myself out of poverty, but to also get my family out of poverty too? And so I just set on this journey with that in mind. Like, I just want to get out of poverty. I want to take my parents out of poverty. And a second piece of that is when you live in Jamaica and people come back, returning residents come back, they made it seem like America was like literally paved with gold and everyone was living in luxury. But when I came, it was like a stark contrast because
Right.
most people I knew had multiple jobs. Most of the jobs were just like jobs, not career. And they were like in debt, just living paycheck to paycheck. So for me, that was like almost like a shock. And so I also said to myself, I need to find a way to not have that life, but to have a career and to be able to build wealth. And so I started the whole process of saving to go back to school. I ended up going to junior college, then going back and getting my 4-year degree and my CPA in the process. And, lots happened in between that. But once I became a CPA and I started to see the possibilities of having a career, then I started to say, okay, now I can really start building wealth. But also in between that, I had bought a house at 25. So I bought a house before I graduated from college. And I had started this little business as well. And then having my degree, I was just like, okay, how can we build wealth? Because now even the idea of being rich and building wealth started to, there's a distinct difference. And I remember going on vacation with my friends and saying, hey, do you guys want to start a stock market investment club? Because we could probably make money doing that. We're not just going to make money from our paycheck. And so we we created a stock market investment club and started to invest. And the idea was to do investments, real estate, all that other stuff. And I started to set more goals. So as I hit 25, I had these goals: graduate college, buy a house. I did that. I said I wanted to leave corporate at 45, have $1 million in my portfolio by 45. And if I have children, also be saved for them by 45. And then after that, I'll figure it out. Got to 45, I didn't hit that goal. But by 48, I had hit those goals as well. And was planning to leave corporate America and had a car accident. And so that completely changed the trajectory. It put a pause on my life basically, because
Right.
it's been over 3 years and I'm still recovering from that accident. So
Right.
yeah, I'll pause there because I know I said a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot, right? Like that's already said like a super impressive story, and that's a lot for a 16-year-old girl, right? Like there's a lot you're carrying as a 16-year-old girl coming to the United States from Jamaica. And I think when I was 16, I wasn't thinking about any of that stuff at all, right? Like it was
Yeah.
like, when can I watch TV and go meet my friends at the mall kind of thing, right? Like I was not thinking about
Yep.
how can I lift myself and my family out of poverty, right? So um quite a serious subject, right? For such a young person, right? And obviously came from your lived experience, right?
Yep.
And yeah, that's just amazing and remarkable, and probably, scary, right? Like to leave your family behind at a young age like that. Doesn't sound like you necessarily knew the people you're going to be staying with. Like there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, I look back now because I have a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old. And I look back now and I remember when my older daughter turned 16 and I would say, that's the age I came to America. And I can't even begin to fathom what what that what that was like. I feel like when I came here, it's almost like I went into this mode where I couldn't think or feel, the way a normal 16-year-old would. It was
Yeah.
just like, I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do this. And I literally had like a checklist. And so my life was a series of checklists for a very long time where it was just like, okay, I can't breathe because I have to get these things done. And
Yeah.
I never really thought about it, interestingly enough, until since I had the accident. I really feel like the accident is redirection. Just thinking about how I lived my life up until that point was very much a check the box. I gotta get this done, I gotta be this, I gotta do this. And no
Mm,
time to really process like, you were 16, you should have just been doing this, or you were this, you should have just been doing this, like none of that mattered at the time because I just needed to get to this goal. And so yeah, I also
yeah.
have gone through a lot of therapy and still continue to go through therapy
Totally,
just to
right?
process these
Yeah,
things.
totally. You know, not in the same way, but my mom passed away when I was 9, and she was sick for several years before that. And so I was doing grocery shopping at the age of 7, 8 years old.
Mm.
I was doing laundry. I was looking after the house. I had a lot of responsibility at a very young age, that I when I looked at my kids at that age, I'm like, I don't even know how that's possible. I think we're, as human beings, we can be so resilient, right?
Yeah.
I think especially as women, right? We're very resourceful and we can just narrow our focus and, like you said, just start ticking the boxes because we have to,
Yeah.
right? Like there
Yes.
isn't another choice,
Yep.
right? And so I totally get it. But similar to you, I had, I had an accident. It wasn't a car accident. It was actually a sporting accident where I broke my leg and, um, couldn't do anything. I was non-weight bearing for 16 weeks.
Wow.
And I could do nothing but think about my
Yeah.
life, basically. Right. And so it's like, okay. And I almost feel like it's the universe or God or source, whatever everybody believes, to say, hang on, you need to process some of this stuff,
Yes.
right? Like you need
Yes.
to slow down for a minute and let some of this sink in,
Yes.
right? And that sounds similar to your situation too.
Absolutely. Yes. So you totally get it because had I not had that accident, I was right at the crossroads. I was starting my business or this dream job came calling and I was making that decision. But as I looking back now, I know it would have been like again that go, 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 check the box, check the box, and bam, like I literally was halted, like you said, 16 weeks. You know what that's like? Like you literally can do I remember at one point I couldn't do anything but think and
Right?
and feel and process. And I realized that when would I have ever have the time to do that if I didn't have the accident? So as much as I hate the fact that I had the accident, and as much as in some ways I no longer said it set me back, I just say it set me on a different path that I
Yeah.
needed to be
Yeah.
on that I didn't realize I needed to be on.
Totally. Redirection, like you said,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. For me, absolutely same kind of story. And my guilty pleasure at that time was I watched the whole season, every season of Scandal there was, and I became an Olivia Pope junkie. I was like, I'm living my life through Olivia Pope. But but
Love it.
outside of that, it was like just contemplation, thinking. I actually watched a lot of Oprah stuff at that
Mm,
point, and she gets you thinking, right? And so it was like, okay, I need to do this work, right?
yeah.
And so you've had an incredible financial story, right? To come from poverty at the level that I
Yep.
can only imagine you came from, arriving in the country with $100, um, to where you are now, right? With a very successful career, sounds like a great wealth portfolio. Um, what was that like for you? Like, did you? It sounds like you were really kind of like geared up for this in your mind. Did you have to work through some of your like stories and stuff around money?
That's interesting because I think because I had this mindset of I never want to be poor or broke. So my story was always I need to have a lot of money.
Mm,
And but not just the money part, like I am big on insurance. So I was like, I have to have insurance, I have to have this. But it was never the scarcity of it was never a thing. It was
right.
always, I need to make sure I accumulate enough that I never have to stress about money again. And so even like emergency fund where they would say keep 3 to 6 months, I always had more than 6 months and I would still have little stash here and there because I was so afraid like if something happens, then I don't want to run out of money. So I think like when I because when I bring people into my coaching program, one of the first thing I do with them is mindset around money, and I realize just how incredible our whole idea and the story we tell ourselves about money is. But again, I think maybe also because I didn't have an option to
Mm,
think about not having money. So I needed to just say, How much do I need to have? How do I need to get it? And what do I need to do to get it? And so, yeah, so I started at 21 to put money in my retirement account because someone had told me that my job was matching, and that's all I wanted to hear. And that's where my journey started, with just like putting money away in my retirement and then setting goals for how much I needed to have. And a lot of it will just come down to going back and looking at how much is in my account and trying to figure out, okay, how do I get to a million by 45? And how much do I need to keep putting in order to get to that million? And then when my children were born, it was like, how much do I need to save for them? I had like a $500,000 goal for them for college. And I was like, how do I need to invest this money? And for me, a lot of that was like investing in the stock market, managing my retirement on my own, and just continuing to monitor it like diligently. I'm like a check the box person, so diligently make
Mhm.
sure I put all the money in that I can, and projecting how much am I going to get at the end of this date.
Right. So definitely what I would call like accumulator money energy, right? Very detail oriented, very like want the accumulation of money. And that's an absolutely great thing. Because accumulator energy is like you easily save, right? Like
Yes, yes,
I don't have
yeah.
that. I do not have that energy. It's hard for me to save. So I had to find strategies that would help me
Mm,
save, right? But yeah, that's so good. And then over the course of your, your career and your life, it from what I read, you've done a lot of work in helping other people create
yes.
wealth, educating children, which always drives me crazy that kids are not educated in school about money and things like that, taxes and mortgages
Yeah.
and all that stuff, right? Like how those things work. Um, how did you get into that?
So I had, as I mentioned, we started the stock market investment club, and once I started that, co-founded, it was me and a bunch of my friends. For me, it wasn't just about keeping the knowledge within this small community. It was sort of, okay, how do we take this knowledge that we have and go and start teaching others? And it was very important for me, especially given, the poverty that I saw around me when I came here, all that I go out and do this volunteer work. And some of my other colleagues from the club joined me as well. But as I had my children, I thought about, okay, most adults don't have the knowledge. Children are so malleable, like you could just take them and teach them anything.
Right?
So I said, I'm going to start a children's financial education club because I'm going to be teaching my children. But again, for me, it's community. Bring all your children and we'll teach them, we'll take them to Wall Street, we'll expose them to that kind of world so that it's automatic for them as they're growing up to have these conversations about money, have these conversations about budget, have these conversations about credit. And that's really how I decided to start doing this, just based on the fact that I didn't want to have illiterate children with no financial knowledge myself. And then,
Mm-hmm.
hey, if I'm teaching my children, I want to also teach other children in the community as well.
That's so good. Do you still do that work?
No, I stopped. You know, it was two reasons why I stopped. One was eventually, as the children were getting a little older, which is kind of sad because that's when they really need to be in it. A lot of them weren't showing up as they should, to our meetings. And so it was sort of like, okay, does this make sense to continue to do that? And eventually I just stopped. Plus, I also got busy. So between everything that was happening, I just stopped doing it. I continued to teach my children and continued to teach, other children that were closer to me, but not as broadly as I was doing it before.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think, it's kids they get distracted with
Yeah.
other things that are more important to them, like boys or girls or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, it just happens. They're not all driven at 16 as you were, right? For sure. Um, so you mentioned, you did have this the car accident, and that kind of set you on a little bit of a different path. Um, what does your life look like now?
So I'm actually just coming out of the car accident, and it's been 3.5 years. So I literally just spiraled into depression, just total transparency. So
Mhm.
let's take a step back. After I had the accident, I was still trying to do my business and my company. I was working at the Federal Reserve Bank at the time, so they held my job for me. But eventually it became clear that I wouldn't be able to go back to work. So then my position went away. I was still trying to do my business, but I realized that I couldn't show up the way I wanted to. So eventually I just said, you know what? The reason why I have disability insurance and long-term disability is to protect me in these times. And I just took off. I went to different healing retreats. I really became immersed in therapy because I realized that if there was nothing else that came out of this accident, I needed to go through therapy. And I'm still doing
Right.
that now. And then I went to India to do alternative treatment because the treatment I was getting here just was not working. It's helped me tremendously. The pain, I had like pain every day, like literally every day. I couldn't sit through an interview for an
Oh,
hour, for even half an hour sometimes. So a lot of that has subsided, and I decided that now I'm going to restart my business. And it just so happens to like I did a TED talk, which when I decided to apply to do this TED talk, I wasn't really sure what the topic was, but what came to me as I was talking to someone was to talk about long-term disability and how
mm,
it can impact your life and what you need to do to prepare if you do have a any kind of disability. Because I had a car accident, but it could be anything. Because most Americans are not prepared. So I did that TED talk, which has been watched now for the past 2 months. It's been out. I think it has about 120,000 views. So this is a topic that
it's
people
great.
really are interested in. And now I feel like that's almost like the platform that I really want to go out and educate people about the importance of just protecting yourself in case you have a disability and what that looks like. And again, restarting my coaching practice to really help people to become financially prepared so that they can retire worry free, but so that even if they end up becoming disabled, they have certain things in place because so many people do not have financial knowledge, especially women. Women shy
Mhm.
away from finances so much, and so I'm really, really looking to work with women, which is who I had been working with in the past to help them to become more confident in managing their finances, and so that they don't have to shy away,
Yeah.
from being able to effectively manage their finances, invest, and not be afraid of it. And it's coming from someone who's done it and know that it is possible. Because I feel that a lot of women are afraid because it sounds scary. Investing in the stock market is sounds scary, and it's not. But there's a lot of other avenues that individuals could get income from and feel confident in their finances.
I love that. In my core business, which is an accounting and bookkeeping firm, right? I'm talking to clients all the time about disability insurance and key
Good.
person insurance, like life insurance.
Yes.
Um, because unfortunately, I've had three over the lifespan of my business. I've had three clients pass away, un, not insured, um,
Wow.
with no will either, and
Wow.
no operating agreement in their business, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, like it sounds like a really crappy thing to like talk about, but I almost feel like it's what I want to like shout from the rooftops at this point
Yes.
because I'm like three times I've had to go through this process where I'm trying to help the family navigate this business, right? And what happens with a business when you pass away, not insured or underinsured or,
Yeah.
without an operating agreement or even, a significant disability, right? I have a client
Right.
right now who has just been diagnosed with breast cancer.
Wow.
And she has a brick and mortar business that she is not going to be able to run. And I'm like, do you have disability insurance? No. Okay. Right.
Wow.
Like, what do we need to do to make sure that women, to me, this is part of putting yourself first,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that's hard for some people. It's hard for some women because, we're kind of like conditioned to put ourselves last, right? Our kids come first, our husbands, our jobs, or whatever it is, right? But it is really part of putting yourself first and making sure that, like, when you put yourself first, then everybody else is going to get taken care of, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And it's like, I feel it's like a passion point for me for people to understand this, right? Similar to you, because I've seen the reality of not doing this. The
Yeah,
reality of not doing it is really awful, like
it is.
so awful, right?
It really is.
And yeah.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
And do you see this like with the clients you're working with? Um, have you had that experience where people are like, yeah, I get what you're saying, Tanya, but I don't have the money for insurance, or that's not going to happen to me, or whatever other 10 million excuses they have?
Yes, yes, yes. And it's one of those things. And now I can point to myself and say, hey, this is what happened to me. But yes, when I coach people and I talk about mindset, the other thing I always talk about is insurance. And are you sufficiently covered? If you have young children, and we kind of go down the list of the different types of insurance, and it's always insurance is a scam. You pay into it, but you're never going to use it, or I may not have, like, I had a, like, someone was a teacher recently was talking to me actually on a podcast, and he said, well, I am a teacher, I don't do anything that's like risky. Why? And it was just devil's advocate, right? Like, why would I need long-term disability insurance while your client had breast cancer? You don't have to do anything risky. I was just driving my daughter to an errand, and boom, I had a car accident.
Right?
So I start out by saying to people, it doesn't matter what you do as a living. That's not why you get the long-term disability. For speaking of that specifically, 1 in 4 Americans could become disabled, and that's a very, very
Right.
high statistics. So
Yeah.
so there's always that pushback because everything else is more important and more priority. Because when you think about insurance, it's almost like it's in the abstract, right? If nothing happens, you're just paying into this and there is nothing coming back to
Totally.
you.
Totally.
But this is one of those risk measures that you need, because if something does happen, you need to have it. And for me, when I had the accident, yes, my company paid 60% of my income, but how many people can really live off 60% of their income? So I
Right?
had a supplemental policy. And so between the supplemental policy and the policy that my company had, it was able to almost bring me back whole. And therefore, I was able to focus on like the 10 things that became unexpectedly. You have the accident and Murphy's Law, like everything starts falling down. And I
Right?
think about the fact that if I didn't have my emergency fund, if I didn't have the supplemental policy, I'm positive I would have to withdraw money from my retirement plan or pull money from my children's college fund to be able to sustain our lifestyle. But with the insurance, I was able to say, okay, despite all of this, we're covered. We have to make adjustments, obviously, but we're still okay. And that's what a lot of women, I mean, everyone, but women, because we always put everything first before ourselves and prioritizing, what needs to happen. But the insurance is really, really important. And it's 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 a sacrifice that you must be willing to make, because in the end, if something were to happen to you, think about your family, think about yourself, think about how much you can really live on, if you especially if you're self-employed, right, and you don't have that
Right?
insurance. Like, what do you do?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally. Right. And the government benefits you could maybe qualify for will be nothing,
It
basically.
takes forever. I applied for Social
Yeah.
Security disability income. It's 3.5 years. I applied maybe a year after. Still haven't gotten a dollar. So, and
Right.
not a lot.
Yeah.
Not a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. So if our listeners are going like, oh my God, I need to look at this, like what's a first step they could take, or what are some steps they could take to like figure this out for themselves?
Yeah. So, first thing I always tell people, if you're self-employed, you're going to be a little bit different. You're going to be probably in the second part of what I say. But if you're employed, the first thing you want to do is go to your employer, HR and or benefits, and find out, do I have long-term disability? If I do, how much do I have? How long does it last? So that's going to give you your foundation. If you have some, okay, fine. Next step, and this is for the self-employed as well, contact 3 different insurance companies and educate yourself. Always first educate yourself. And then you want to contact 3. I always say 3 because then you kind of compare all 3 and you start inquiring about long-term disability. They'll want to know how much you make, just to be able to, and if you're employed, they're going to look at how much you already have from your employer. And then they're going to work with you to come up with how much long-term disability you'll need. Every policy might be a little bit more nuanced. Some people might say, I want a 5-year policy. Some may say, I want a 10-year policy, and price is going to be a factor. They're going to look if you have pre-existing condition. That's why even getting it when you're younger and you're healthier is better, because certain pre-existing conditions, they will automatically deny you. And then you just want to know different things like, if you work part-time, like if you're not fully disabled and you're just partially disabled, will they still cover some of it? Some policies will. It depends on how the policy is written. Some may not. So there's a lot of education that you have to do for yourself. And then you start asking the questions of the agent so that you ensure that you're getting the right policy for yourself. And even something as simple as the supplemental policy that I had, it kicked in after 3 months. So despite my job, and most jobs, your policy doesn't kick in for 6 months, and I've come to learn that even some for a year. So imagine if you become disabled, you may get short-term disability, but if your long-term disability doesn't kick in for 6 months, how are you going to support yourself, especially if you don't have an emergency fund? So even when you're
Right.
buying that supplemental policy, those are some of the things that you want to look at. Like, how long do I want to wait until this policy kicks in?
Right.
And I did write a book after my experience, and I started going through the whole process. I wrote a book about, it's called Limitations to Limitless. And I talked about, all the different facets that I went through, all the different things that could go wrong, all the different things that you need to do to ensure that you have the right policy, some of the questions that you need to ask when you're going out to buy the policy, and just some of the research that you need to do just so that you feel educated and empowered, and you're not just listening to someone sort of tell you something. Because while I believe that there are fine insurance agents out there who is going to offer you the best policy, there are some that are not. And if you're educated about it, then it's easier for you to be able to say, hey, what about this? What does this mean? And be able to get the right policy and the right coverage for yourself.
Yeah,
But
I love that. That's so good. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, I think sometimes people, um, I'll say people, I don't know, women in particular, maybe women of color, even more so, don't feel they can ask questions, right?
yeah,
They feel like, they're going to look stupid, or they should know this information, or
yeah,
who am I to ask these questions? And I think approaching anything from the energy of curiosity is the most advantageous approach for us.
absolutely. Absolutely. I always tell people, whether it's my clients or non-clients, anytime you're going to get into any, whether it's buying insurance, whether it's investing, if you're self-employed, going to invest in a Roth or whatever the case is, do some self-education. You should always have questions and never be afraid to ask questions, because if you're not asking the questions, then they're just going to tell you what they think that you want to hear, and what they think is good for you, and what they tell you that's good for you may not always be the thing that's good for you. So you have to self-educate and never ever be afraid to ask questions. If you're asking someone a question and they are getting annoyed, they're not the right person to be working with. They should welcome your questions and then be able to answer you in a way that's going to make you feel satisfied with the answer that you said, that you say, yes, I want to go ahead and do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So good, right? But we all deserve this level of security, right? Um,
Yes.
of like peace of mind, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's what my insurance provides, right? Like I totally get the thought of like, oh, I pay into this thing, and what if I never claim it? And da, da, da. But life insurance is different. Everybody's going to die, right?
Right.
But,
Yeah.
I totally get the resistance, but at the same time, like, what's your peace of mind worth? Right?
Exactly. And if you have a car, you have to get insurance, right? If you have a house, you get insurance.
Yeah,
It's the same thing. Like your peace of mind is really important. If you have children, or even if you don't have children, if you are having this lifestyle that you're living and suddenly you become disabled, how are you going to continue to live that life when you recover?
totally. 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 Like when I broke my ankle and my leg, um, I was just kind of like, it was 5 years into my business, but I really
Mm,
didn't take my business that seriously in those first 5 years. My husband paid the bills. This is the thing I did, whatever. Right. Um, so I did have I didn't have any disability insurance. It wasn't something I even considered. Right.
mhm.
And, it it impacted our lifestyle, right? We didn't have this extra money coming in. We didn't
Right.
have,
Yep.
the all the things that extra money provided. Like my
Exactly.
husband's salary at the time could pay our bills, but could we go out for dinner whenever we wanted? Could we
Right.
go on holiday? Like all that kind of stuff, right? And then um and then it also impacted my relationship with my husband, right? Because now he had to pay all the bills. There wasn't this
Yeah.
extra money, right? Like he wanted to go to a hockey game. Well, we don't have the money to go to a hockey game
Right.
now, right? Or, we accumulated a bit of debt in that period, right?
Yeah.
Because we didn't have this rainy day fund. Um, and so I know what it's like to have your own business, have something happen that you don't expect to happen. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, shoot, what am I going to do? And now I had a little bit
Yeah.
of a backup, but it did change things in my life. Right. And from that moment, I said, this will never happen to me again,
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember like writing in my journal, like, this is never happening to me again. Right. Like, I am not going to be reliant on anyone. I am not going to do this ever again. Like, I didn't have really like my own money at that point.
Right.
And so I like had to like, can you go buy me this thing? Or it was just weird. Change the dynamic. It was super uncomfortable. So yeah, I'm totally a supporter of this.
Yeah.
And especially if you're self-employed, right?
Yes.
Like you have
And
your
if
own
you're the
business.
main breadwinner in the
Oh,
family,
totally.
like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. Yeah. And
Yeah.
even for me, although I had all this, I still incurred debt because my daughter got sick. Her medical issues were not covered by insurance. Like there were so many pieces that came into play. I was like, what is the universe trying to tell me here?
Right?
Because I had a tenant, she stopped paying her rent. And then on top of that, like I needed to pay for my own physical therapy because the physical therapy I was getting was not helpful. So I had to go out and seek my own. I couldn't cook. My husband wasn't really cooking. Like I mean, he had his own stuff that he was doing. So we relied a lot on Uber Eats. So like all those things that were not the normal expenses suddenly came into play, and you never know what's going to happen if you do become disabled and the additional costs on top of it. So I
Yeah.
always talk about how I prepared all this stuff, I stayed out of debt, I did all these things, and here I was, bam, um,
Right?
in debt, which is something that was like so foreign for me. And I had to become comfortable with that, knowing that, okay, this is a season and you will know how to you'll know how to get out of it, when you're ready. But you have to, this is what you have to do. And even that was really difficult for me, like really, really difficult, just the whole idea, because it wasn't something that I was, I just never really used to have debt. And the what you said about relying on someone else, like if I had to rely on my husband for money, I know, like, because if for my entire life everything I did was
I
my
know.
money, and then suddenly like, oh wow, what? But yeah, these are the things that we as women really need to think about. And when that resistance come up, we go, oh yeah, I gotta do this. I gotta, whatever I need to sacrifice over here to get this, I have to do this because it, you don't want to be sick and dealing with your illness and be like worried, like, oh my God, how am I going to pay my bill? How am I
Totally.
going to do this? How am I going to do that? It just makes sense. And I mean, pricing is, it's relative to say if something is expensive or not, but I didn't think it was like super expensive where it's like, oh my God, this is going to break the bank. It could be, okay, I'm not good. I do this every month. Maybe I'll cut back half of this and cut back something else. And then I get this long-term disability because, as you said, it's your peace of mind, and nothing beats your peace of mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. 100%. And so, one more aspect that I think I want to make sure we drive home for our listeners, because you're so experienced in this area. And you can speak to this, I think, um, equally, if not more than me, is something you mentioned a little bit earlier, which was, women not talking about money and not talking about these things either to each other or to their kids or their family or whoever, right? Um, and I think especially women of color, marginalized parts of our communities, there's this, I don't know, fear maybe, or intimidation factor or something around talking about money. And I always remember hearing, I think it was Rachel Rogers said in her book that if women had started talking about their salaries back in the 60s or the 50s, we wouldn't have the wage disparity gap that we have,
She's
right?
right. Yeah.
Right. And
She's
so, like,
right.
it's kind of, I don't want to say it's our own fault, but we contributed to the problem because we did not talk about it. And, part of that is conditioning and all the stuff around that. Right. But, that's why I encourage people to talk about these things, to be open about money, to be talking about money, insurance, putting ourselves at the forefront of this conversation rather than an afterthought, right?
Yeah.
And um, did you ever struggle talking about money in your life?
That's an interesting question. Because I think, because again, because I came from the mindset, I'm always telling people to let's get rich together. Like that was always my thing. But
Totally.
but you are correct about even salary. My friends and I who kind of grew up in our career together, as you said this, I realized like we never really talk about our salaries. I only have
Mm-hmm.
one friend that I know how much she makes. And when I was working, like, or at least when I was starting my last job, she knew how much I made. We just never really talked about that deep level of money. But when it comes to like talking about money with friends, like I vacation with my friends sometimes, or we go to dinner sometimes. And for us as friends, the conversation always comes up. I think I'm the one that always talk about it because we start with
Right.
what's our budget. Everything for me is like we got to have a budget, and whether we're deciding to take a luxury vacation or a budget vacation, that's a conversation that we're going to have before we even start the planning, so that everybody is on the same page. And like when we go out with our children, my children, they're almost programmed now, even at this age. We sit at the table, and the first thing they say is, "What's my budget?" And so my friends automatically would say to their children, whatever Tanya's budget is, that's your whatever the girl's budget is, that's your budget. So we talk about it in that sense. But in terms of how much we make, no, we never talk about that kind of stuff.
Right.
And again, only one friend that I have where I'll even know like, okay, if she has a lot of debt or she don't have a lot of debt, like we get deep into conversation, and it's not because I'm a financial coach, we just have those conversations. But again, when I just look at my circles, I you're it's like so interesting that you asked me that
Mm-hmm.
question because I've never really thought about it, but we just never really do.
Yeah, I
And
know. I didn't think about it either till I read her
that's,
book. And
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
like I think about, in my 20s and in like early 30s in my corporate career, I'm pretty confident, given everything I know now, that the men that I worked around were making more money than me.
No, absolutely.
Now, I
Absolutely.
think guys talk about their salary all the time, right? I've heard it, right? How much money I worked on the trading floor at Citibank in London, England, and
Ah, okay.
they will brag
Oh
about how
yeah,
much
they
money they're
brag.
making,
They
right? It's
brag.
like really bro kind of money energy, right? I would
Yeah,
never say how much I made, partly because I
yeah.
think I was maybe embarrassed that I wasn't making what they were
What they
making,
make.
right? But like if we had had those conversations, if our grandmothers had had those conversations or great grandmothers, then I do agree with Rachel Rogers that that disparity gap maybe wouldn't have been, like, we would have been aware of it and we would have maybe been able to ask for more money, right?
Yes,
And so I encourage my friends, I encourage my kids, my family members to have really transparent conversations about money and at what they make, what they have in debt, what they have in savings. Like, I don't
that's
care.
great.
I'm not judging people,
Yeah.
right? Um, it doesn't matter, but until you are willing to like lay it all out there,
Open it. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
right? Like, what do they
Yeah.
open your kimono or whatever? Like, until you can lay it all out there, then
Yeah.
you don't know the landscape,
Yeah.
right?
It's a
And
shame. It's a shame that we all feel. It's funny, I did a TikTok video yesterday and I was talking about it. Like, most of us, right? Let's say the holiday is coming and there's this expectation that you have to do all these things, right? And a lot of people are struggling financially now, but no one is going to pipe up and say, hey, can we do a potluck instead of me preparing all the meals? Or can we do a gift exchange instead of
right,
me buying gifts for everybody? Like, it's so taboo to have those conversations. So what ends up happening is you go and you spend all this money and you get into all this debt when you know that you can't afford it. And I guarantee you, your friend over there, same thing. This other friend, same. But if we just all come together and say, guys, we got to do something different this year. I just can't afford it. The other two people would say, yeah, it's really hard for me too. Like, I can't really afford it. Can we do this instead? But
yeah,
we're just not having those discussions. And it's quite sad.
yeah, yeah, and that I think that comes from our confidence as well, right? Like being
Yeah.
empowered about money and being in a empowered conversation about money is
Yeah.
is a significant shift for some people, right?
Yes.
Um, but even if it's like, I love the idea of saying, like, what's our budget, right? Like,
Yep.
like just being really blatantly honest. I'm doing a girls' trip next year, and we're on WhatsApp, this little group of ladies. I only know
Nice.
one of the other
Oh, I love
ladies,
that.
but yeah. And we were talking about the hotel we are going to stay at, and blah 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 blah. And it's in Florida, and there's an air show and all this stuff. And me and a couple of the other ladies wanted to stay like in the penthouse, like all together, right? Like 6 ladies could
Uh-huh.
share the penthouse, rather than having separate rooms. Right. We
Right.
thought that
Yeah.
would be more
Yeah.
fun.
Yep.
Right. But we didn't have the budget conversation. Right. And
You
so
gotta have
I know, right? And so
it.
now we're in this weird situation where one of them went and booked it, and now there's some who are like, well, I don't want to pay that much,
Oh,
right? And now it's all
yeah.
weird. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, now this feels super uncomfortable, right? Because
Yeah.
and feels a little judgy because I want to do this, but somebody only wants to pay $50 a night. And I'm just like, oh my God, like this is now super complicated because we didn't have the conversation, right?
Right.
We all
Yeah.
assumed we were on the same page,
Yeah.
right? And we weren't, very clearly.
Yeah.
And so we're
Yes.
now navigating that whole weird situation where, to be honest, one of the ladies is going to pay for somebody else to go
Wow.
because she feels bad, right? And I'm like,
Wow.
Well, I don't actually think it's your responsibility to pay
Yeah.
for her,
Yeah.
but that just means that she doesn't stay with us. And so our individual price goes up, right? Like that's how
Right.
I look at it.
Yeah,
That
that's true.
seems more
Yeah.
fair, but whatever. I just left them to figure it out because I was like, just
But
tell
it's
me
not
what you
too
want me
late,
to
right?
pay.
You can go back now and
Yeah,
just say for the rest of the trip, since we had the snafu, let's really think about what our budget is going to be like and what each person
totally.
could afford, because we
Yeah,
want to, because then there might be this tension, right? Like, oh my God, I can't afford this. Why did they do this?
totally.
And you don't want that to ruin your trip. That's why for us, like,
Yeah,
and it just became standard for us with our trip. Like literally the first thing we do whenever we start planning a trip is, okay, what's our budget?
yeah,
From airfare to hotel to even restaurants. Are we going to fancy restaurant? Or maybe we'll do two fancy restaurants. We're going to do cheap this time. Like all of that
yeah,
conversation is being had before we make our plans, because
yeah.
we don't want it to be weird. And when I tell people all the time, like, yeah, I travel with my friends, we've never had any situation. And I think that is the piece of it where we've ironed
Yeah.
that down to the point where we never have to like think about it. And
So good.
if it's out of budget for someone, they're just going to say I can't do it, or we say let's figure out how we're going to make it work so that we all go together.
Yeah, totally. It just makes sense, right? It's common sense. So
Yeah.
good. This is such a great conversation. Thank you, Tanya, for taking the time out of your day to share this with me and with the listeners at the podcast. It's just so good. Such a great conversation. We will put all the links to follow you online. I don't think I have the link for your book, so I want to get that from you because I think that's a really great thing for people to, spend $20 and get a book and educate yourself, right? Like
Yeah.
it's an important piece.
It's really it's why I wrote it, because I felt like there's nothing out there that's helpful to just like a regular person to say, how do I navigate this? And that was really
Yeah.
why I did that book.
Yeah.
So I will send it to you.
And the link for the TED Talk,
Yes,
for
I
sure.
will do
Yeah,
that.
totally.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so incredibly grateful. Anything you want to end with at the culmination of an amazing interview?
I thought this was great. I think we covered so much grounds, and I
We
just
did.
wanted to thank you for, having this podcast where we can really sit and talk and just talk candidly and honestly, which is how we should normalize this kind of conversation.
Right?
And I think this is like a step in the right direction where we could really start doing this. So thank you for having me, and
Yeah,
thank you for
totally.
your uplifting podcast. I've listened to quite a few
Awesome.
episodes, and it's great.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Great. Awesome. So we'll share everything in the show notes. Contact Tanya. Like, get in her world. I guarantee you will learn several things and grow. And I would love to hear, all of the success stories because I think there'll be plenty from this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Well, I don't know about you, but I certainly learned a lot. I am just about to click on the link to buy Tanya's book because I want to know the questions I should be asking. I mentioned it today, right? In this podcast, we want to be curiously empowered, right? We want to approach our finances, our money conversations, our insurance conversations, our business conversations with curiosity. This is energy that is more about finding the answers and being resourceful rather than feeling like an idiot who doesn't know what you're talking about. I would love to hear your feedback on this episode. If anything stood out for you and what next steps you will take in your financial security. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next week on the Rich Life Revolution. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you got at least one gold nugget today. Be sure to grab your copy of the Rich Life Revolution workbook to help you set the foundation for your next level of wealthy. Get it now at richliferevolution.ca, and I'll see you later.